And now on to our speaker. Father CP&BC is the National Executive Director of Boes Town. He became the fourth priest to succeed Father Edward Flanagan back in July of 2005, so 9.5 years he's been in this position now. Father Flanagan began his work in 1917, so you've got an anniversary coming up here. As National Executive Director, Father Boes oversees one of the largest privately funded nonprofit, non-sectarian child care agencies in America. Through its youth care and health care programs, Boes Town directly cares for more than 63,000 children in 12 states. In addition, Boes Town National Hotline and Outreach Services reach nearly an additional 1 million children and families. He has served in the past, before his life at Boes Town, as the director of the St. Augustine Indian Mission in Winnebago. He has been a priest of the Archdiocese of Omaha since 1985. Please give a warm welcome to Father CP&BC.
Well, it's great to be here today, and the talk I'm going to give you is exactly the slides and most of the presentation that I would give to a new employee. So consider yourself new employees of Boes Town after this. Oh, let's see if I can get this to work. There we go. This guy, Father Edward Flanagan. You might recognize his photograph, the founder of Boes Town. He was ordained for a priest for the Archdiocese of Omaha in 1912. He's an Irish immigrant, came to the United States to study for the priesthood. His brother came first and was a priest of the diocese, and that's part of why he got out here to Omaha. You see, they sent the Irish priests out here because it didn't matter how smart you were. That's what they told him. You aren't very smart, go to Nebraska, they'll take anybody. That's what they told him, really. They had too many priests in New York. You might be surprised to know that Father Flanagan didn't start his work with homeless boys on the street. He started his job with homeless men. Homeless men. He was in a parish in South Omaha and he saw all the homeless men around and he thought, this is crazy. They're sleeping on the streets, they're sleeping in boxes, we got to do something. And so that's what he started doing. He started taking care of these guys, and with the help of the St. Vincent de Paul Center, he set up 3 hotels basically for homeless men. He actually called them, because he's a master of marketing, the Working Man's Hotel. And if you had a nickel, because you were really working, you got a hotel room. You got your own room. It wasn't that nice, but it was something. And if you were sober, you got a bunk bed in the long row of bunk beds. And if you were drunk, you slept on the concrete floor in the basement. And most of them were drunk. It was a rough time, a rough place. Father Flanagan was beat up lots of times, verbally abused almost every day. So of the thousands and thousands of men that came to him, hundreds died of cirrhosis in their bed in the shelter. People dying all the time. As he started doing this work, he started saying, I need to see if what I'm doing is effective. So research has been a part of Boes Town from its very founding. So Flanagan started keeping track of the guys for 3 years that he took care of, and then when they came back, checked to see how they were doing. So every year, so he has 3 years on some of these guys. What he discovered is not surprising to us now, but nobody knew it back then. Homeless men were on a solid rate of decline, right into the cellar. Every year, their health got worse, so he asked, how much do you weigh? How's your physical health? What's your relationship to your family? How's your relationship to God? Body, mind, and spirit, they were going in the tank. Became a little discouraged by that, because he was working his rear off doing this with these homeless guys, talking to them, counseling them. And as he asked their life story, they would tell him, almost to a man, it's too late for me, Father. I'm hopeless. Where were you when I was 12? Where were you when I was 14? You could have helped me then. So he became intellectually convinced that he needed to start at a younger age if he was going to have a lifelong impact on these guys. And as what fate would have it, I love technology. I swear I do. As fate would have it, a little homeless boy showed up at his homeless shelter for men, and he couldn't turn him away. It was a freezing cold night. He was wet. The kids lived in boxes. You see the box there? Because freight was shipped in railroads in big boxes. And then when they're done with the boxes, they'd throw them to the side of the road, or to the side of the railroad tracks. The kids would drag them behind businesses and pull them over the top of them to create shelters, fill them full of newspapers. So one of these kids, somebody stole his box, so he was going to freeze to death that night. So he knocked on the door of the shelter, got let in. Father Flanagan took a few days to learn his story and found out he'd run away from home, not because anything was bad at home, because he saw a hobo movie and thought it would be cool. Little idiot, right? Gets on a train and ends up in the middle of nowhere, hundreds of miles from home. Well, they used the telegraph, get a hold of his family, send him back home. But by then, something had happened. If you know how a shelter works, little dudes don't get to stay at the shelter all day. All the men have to leave the shelter during the day because the staff only works at night. So he would go out and tell all the other little dudes, there's an Irish priest that'll feed you, give you a place. And he went from one boy to 50. And he couldn't figure out how to take care of them. Well, he couldn't. There's no room in the shelter. There was drinking and drugs and foul language. It was a bad place. He's like, you can't stay here. Stay in your boxes. Come at noon. And he said a prayer, fed him a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, taught him a little American history, and then he had one bat, one ball, and one glove. They played baseball on an abandoned lot. And then something changed inside of Father Flanagan. He made room for those boys in his heart. And that's when Boes Town started. Actually, our legal name is, my lawyer is here today, our legal name is Father Flanagan's Boys Home, not Boes Town. But that's the only place for a child. The only home for a child is in the heart of a loving human being. And Father Flanagan created that. He had a little help from the very earliest days. He had help from people of all faiths. This dude is Henry Monsky. He's a Jewish attorney in town. He was sitting in the back of the Douglas County Courthouse, and he was fighting for the Jewish kids who would come up, who would get arrested for stealing bread or breaking a window or something. Because they would be sent two places, both which were bad. They'd be sent to reform schools, which were prisons, really nasty prisons where they chained the kids to the wall, and they had burial plots right next to the prison because they killed about 10% of the kids that they took care of with abuse. So that's a bad place to get sent. Or they get sent to a Christian orphanage and be forcibly converted, which is a dirty little aspect of our faith. St. James Orphanage was being run by Flanagan's brother at the time he started this place, and we forcibly converted every child that showed up to our faith. But so did the Methodists and the Baptists and everybody else. So he didn't want them to lose their Jewish faith, so he was trying to put them in Jewish basements all over Omaha. And so he'd see a little Goldstein kid, and he'd get in the back of the courthouse and say, I'll take him, Judge. Found a basement for him. But he was running out of basements. The Jewish people would run away from him at the synagogue because they knew they'd got a doggone kid he was going to have to place. So he saw Flanagan in the back of the courthouse. They knew each other growing up in Omaha. They both worked at Cudahy in the accounting department. And he said, Eddie, what are you doing? He goes, oh, I'm starting this thing for kids. He goes, if I send you one of my kids, would you forcibly convert them? He said, I would never do that. What an amazing thing to say 100 years ago, that ecumenical approach. But think about it. Flanagan came from Ireland. The signs in the United States didn't read, no colored need apply. It said no colored, no Irish. The Irish were mixed in with all those inferior races. And his own people had been the victim of religious prejudice by the British who tried to convert them to Protestantism. So he wasn't about to do that to the kids in his care. Very forward thinking. So he got a $90 loan from his buddy. Never paid him back. Monsky later said, best investment I ever made. Just redefined it. This was the place they stayed in December 12th, 1917, the corner of 20th and Dodge. By the way, Monsky became pro bono counsel and was on the board for the rest of his life. They died within months of each other. Now, we tried to turn this place into a national historical site, but it was torn down in the late 1960s by a company called Enron. Enron. These are supposedly the first 5 boys, but 23 people claim to be the first 5 boys, so we don't really know who they are. This is a very early picture. Flanagan wanted to put the boys to work. They went to school during the day, but he wanted them to work for their keep. And you can see they have shorty little pants. That's because to make money on the street, besides stealing bread, they sold newspapers. They were newsies. And they would sell newspapers, so he had them sell his newspaper. So since 1917, we have published the Boys' Home Journal. And it contains his ideas about how to take care of kids. Like you don't forcibly convert them to your religion. Like you treat them well. Like you send them to school. All those things sound very normal now, not so much 100 years ago. That was a very new way of taking care of kids. Pretty soon, instead of 5 boys, he had 75 and needed a new home. He ended up moving to the corner on South 13th Street, right across from where Rosenblatt used to be. And it was a former German-American home, and it still stands. We take kids there once in a while on kind of a pilgrimage. He generated a lot of publicity, got some help with the nuns. See the flying nuns here? Big habits. Some nuns, but lots of people from other religions. And then South Omaha raised up its hackles because he was mixing the races and the religions. And they were having none of it. Now, South Omaha was one of the most racially and religious diverse places in the world, or in the United States for sure. But they all lived in their little ghetto. Remember the days when Irish Catholic couldn't marry German Catholic, right? That's how ghettoized they were, but especially by race. So they said, out. We want you out of South Omaha. He looked all over town, couldn't find any place, started his own darn town. 15 miles out of town, he bought a farm. It was called Overlook Farm. 1921, 60 acres. It had 89 varieties of trees, livestock, and the kids, again, they were like farm kids. They did chores in the morning, they did chores at night, and went to school during the day. Very unusual for that time. The dirty little secret of most orphanages is none of them closed during the Great Depression. You're business people. What does that mean? They made money. The little kids, the little Catholic kids, by the way, at Catholic orphanage, they built St. James right next to one of our hospitals. That's what we did all over the United States. Little kids scrub sheets 8-10 hours a day. Scrub the blood out of sheets, their hospitals. They earned their keep and then some, and were barely given even a bed to sleep on. That's the dirty little secret of most orphanages before Flanagan changed it all. He said, this is a home. If the kids want to leave, they can leave, but we're going to create a home-like environment. He set up self-government. What he meant by that was the bigger kids took care of the little kids, just like in a home. And that's where the mayor of Boys Town comes from. In fact, in 1926, the Boys it became a village in the state of Nebraska, and the boys voted to call it Boys Town. That's where the name came from. It didn't come from Flanagan. The kids voted. That's what they wanted to call it. Then he decided to get his message out. And he used the new media of the day, the radio. This would have been the blogging, texting, tweeting, Instagramming, whatever the newest thing is that of the time. And of course, most Protestant ministers and a lot of Catholics were saying that it was the devil's own box because bad things were coming out of there. Kind of like we talk about the internet today, right? So he was out there telling about a new way of taking care of kids, and his message seems real simple to us. There are no bad boys. It's bad example, bad training, bad environment. We're all like, well, yeah, of course. You put a kid in a new environment, they behave differently. That was not the social theory of the time. The social theory of the time was eugenics. E-U-G-E-N-I-C-S. If you don't know it, look it up. It's nasty. It said if you're not from Western Europe and you don't have the right skin color, which is this, you're inferior. Hitler picked it up as his social theory. It started in southern universities in the United States of America. And most major newspapers and news outlets believed it. The inferior people, of course, were the Jews, the Irish, Slavs, Poles, Czechs, Italians, anybody that wasn't white. And they taught that they're an inferior race and they should just let them die if they're poor. If you remember the Dickens, to decrease the excess population. They were excess population. But Flanagan teaching there are no bad boys was radical at that time. Now luckily, Omaha was one of the most progressive places in the United States. That's why there was people that were fighting for the rights of American Indians here. And you probably heard of this famous case of Black Elk. And so, is that the right name? Black Elk? No. Standing Bear. Sorry, I got those guys mixed up. Standing Bear. The trial of Standing Bear here in Nebraska said that Indian people were actually people. So that was a pseudo-racist science, and he was fighting against that. Well, luckily, Louis B. Mayer's secretary, who was the president of MGM, was listening to Flanagan on these independent radio stations. The kids would speak and sing, and he'd talk about his philosophy. So Louis said, he held a newspaper article about Flanagan. That's how they made their movies back then. They used to base them on newspaper articles. Hey, Madge, ever heard of this Flanagan guy? And she had. Yeah, he's a good guy. Heard him on the radio. So they decided in 1938 to make a movie about us, Boys Town. He becomes an international star. He became friends of Hollywood stars like the stars of the movie, Spencer Tracy and Vicki Rooney. Other stars like Bing Crosby and Bob Hope. Sports figures like Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, and Joe Louis. And presidents, Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman. In fact, it was Roosevelt would stop by and discuss the New Deal and how it could affect kids with him on his campaign trails. He'd stop and stay at his house. Truman sent him first to Asia and then to Germany to oversee the war effort, and it was in Germany that he died in 1948. Then 3 other priests followed Father Flanagan. Father Wagner, who was handed a little bit of a problem when he showed up. Boys Town was $5 million in debt. 1948. $200 million of debt in today's money. Imagine that. Oh, here, you got to pay this off. He did a good job. He created our system of mailing across the United States. We now have 1 million donors, and it creates a lot of income for us even still. But he raised the home from 500 kids to about 1,000. Father Hupp recognized that girls were needing trouble as much as boys, opened the home to girls, started our research hospital about 40 years ago. Now it's connected to Allegiant Creighton downtown, and now it's out at, we also have one at the home campus. And then Father Peter, in 1985, strengthened the spiritual parts of our model and expanded us nationwide. So we're at about 12 sites across the United States because of Father Peter. Then that Father Boes guy came and completely blew it. No. What I decided when I arrived is I started giving talks around town, and people would say, "Don't you guys have a lot of money?" And I'm like, "Yes, we do. We have an endowment of about $940 to $60 million, depending on the day." Yeah, our annual budget, though, is $330 million. We're a big operation. And I thought to myself, if you got a big endowment, and you're all across the United States, you better have a big mission you're trying to accomplish, not a little one. And so we decided to look at what are the big problems, not just facing kids in Omaha, but across the United States. So this is it. The #1 problem, we think, is a fragmented system of care. You see the kid that needs help, the identified patient. It's always the whole family's got something going on, but the identified patient's here and there's the family. When you try to get your child help for a mental illness, drug addiction, school failure, anything, the system creates a wall in front of you. First of all, you don't know which service to pick, and you can't get in unless you're super wealthy. Because you usually, to get kid into one of these levels of care, you have to stand in front of a judge and be declared an unfit parent, have your child be arrested multiple times or try to be suicidal multiple times, or you have to start abusing your child because you get frustrated and you smack him a few times and he goes to the hospital and ends up in social services. Then once they get into this level of care, let's say once they get into foster care, the other dirty little secret is they never get out. Because home never is good enough, according to the social worker, once a kid's in foster care. They never get out. And as we say, it's like the Hotel California. You can check out, but you can never leave. There are kids who've been in foster care, 6, 8 foster homes, failing in one after the other, and they won't move them out of that level of care to a different level. They'll just keep failing the kid over and over and over. We think there should be a different system, so we decided to start ourselves. We go, remember somebody, if you ever had a leader and you want to go, you go first, right? It's like in war. I want you to take that hill. Yeah, you go first. Then we'll all follow you. Well, we decided to go first because we're actually leaders at Boes Town. Not just me, but all of us. We built a system of care that's easy to access on the bottom and has higher levels of care depending on the need of the child and the family. So at the bottom, we have community support services. We have a 24-hour hotline. We have kids can text us with their problems. We have a blog. We have a website that's one of the top websites for parenting in the United States, parenting@boestown.org. And it's incredible. We get 400,000 hits a year. Google's got us as one of their top 20 for 400 different parenting problems. Then we have in-home services. If you need a little higher level of care, a worker can come into your home and help. And that's like Nanny 911. But that's usually the state is intervening in your life and about ready to pull your child out at that time. Then, of course, if they need foster care, we have it. We have the family home program, which is what everybody knows as home campus. We have intervention and assessment, where it's like a shelter where we figure out what level of care the kid needs to be in and then move them into that level. And then we actually built a new residential treatment center, which is like a psych unit for kids at the absolute highest level. But we imagine this like a pyramid. At the top are just a few kids, tougher kids, and at the bottom you try to help as many kids at the bottom as possible. So when I came 9.5 years ago, we were serving 14,000 kids. 75% of them we pulled out of the home to help. At the end of last year, 2014, we helped 30,000 kids, actually 32,000. 90% never left home to get help. We've transformed Boes Town into a mostly community-based outpatient effort. We're helping kids earlier so they don't become the kids that later need to be pulled out of their home. And it's working. It's working across the United States. People are picking up this language and building their own continuums of care across the United States. And that's exactly what we want. We did a new strategic plan in 2013 and said, what's the next step we could take? What's the next biggest problem facing all the kids in the United States that are troubled? We found out that the system of distribution is scattered. You're all business people, you know that's inefficient, right? So the most troubled kids are in yellow. They're in certain parts of town. You might read about those parts of town in the newspaper. Guess where all of our services are, our offices? Never in those parts of town. Not even Boes Town. We didn't have an office in North or South Omaha, and yet we were taking care of 2,000 kids in those communities with our in-home services. Well, we decided to start parking ourselves in the toughest parts of town, get to know them better, build partners, and try to work at doing something like Jeffrey Canada did in the Harlem Children's Zone. Try to impact a little bit of the toughest communities in America, see if we can come up with a model for others to follow. So we're going to start, I think, in South Omaha. We haven't announced anything yet, but that's probably where we're going to start. We're going to work with a bunch of partners to improve student outcomes in the schools, to improve the number of kids, keep more kids at home, less kids pulled out of the home, less kids arrested, less poverty, more parents with jobs. Now, some of that stuff we don't do. We don't help parents get jobs. But we'll work with other partners to get that work done. And we're going to try to change what happens to kids in that area. So that's our model, and we haven't even completed it yet. We're still taking care of the toughest, we're still taking care of kids in their home whenever possible. We built this outpatient behavioral health center. It's one of the prettiest buildings on campus. We did a $10 million campaign with the help of Ken Stinson a couple years ago. And this is 4,000 people now can get high quality child psychology. Most child psychology stinks. Ours is good. We actually train pre- and postdoctoral candidates, and we're now going to send them out across the United States with the Boys Town banner above their name, which is like the good housekeeping seal of approval. You can trust this guy or this lady, right? So that's our plan for this, because we want to keep helping more kids. But we're not getting rid of the toughest kids. We're still taking care of them. We built a new residential treatment center, serves another like 25, 27 kids. And we may even build another one out there because the need is so high at the top. So we still take care of the toughest kids. We're actually doing something that's kind of Star Wars-y. We bought a new toy. You all know we do research, right, at the research hospital. We mostly study deaf and hard of hearing kids. Well, Dr. Brookhauser, who's since died, who started the hospital, said he needed a new toy. This is it. It's a 3 Tesla MRI. You guys know what an MRI is, right? And he needed it to study the brain of kids who are deaf so they could communicate better with the device, cochlear implants or hearing aids. That's the cutting edge of our research for deaf kids. And I said to him, that's a really expensive toy. Could we do something else with it? And he said, I'll look into that. And what we discovered is that across the United States, they're using MRIs like this to study kids that are troubled. So they now know what the depressed teenage brain looks like, the anxious teenage brain. And they know what the normal teenage brain looks like, which is still awfully weird. But nobody in the world is trying to make this brain, depressed, look like this brain, not depressed. Are you kidding me? Nobody in the world. Not Harvard, not Johns Hopkins, nobody. I said, why don't we do that? First we tried to get other people to do it, but they wouldn't. And we had the machine anyway, so we're going to start doing that. In fact, we're in a campaign right now to raise about $15 million to jumpstart this campaign. Ultimately, the federal government's very interested in this, and they're going to fund it with research funding, like we get at the hospital. So it's very exciting. We're already studying kids using the intervention of exercise to treat depression. There's a video game that treats depression. Every kid wants to do that one. And there's other interventions that we use to treat kids, like on campus. We're going to be able to prove that our interventions actually change the way the brain functions. We're pretty sure that it does, but we're going to measure it very clearly. Right now, the only people that are studying kids' brains are people who sell pharmaceuticals. So they pop in pills in kids and then measure in their brains. We think there's a better way to do it. So this is the cutting edge, the new Boys Town. And I got a few minutes for questions because it's very little time left. Any questions? Yes?
Father, are you still doing the model internationally too, the whole Boys Town?
We only train the model internationally. So there's a Boys Town. I just got to visit it when I was on sabbatical. There's a Boys Town, Italy. It has nothing to do with us. What happened was the United States government sent Father Wagner out all over the world to build Boys Towns. They didn't use our model. There was nothing like us. They just stole the name. And it was their effort for the State Department to fight communism. It kind of worked because it was an outreach to help kids. No, we train internationally, but we have nothing else international.
That subject you just brought up is what my question to you is about. Why would you use federal government dollars to help you to build this new program when the federal government is going to dictate to you how and what you can do with your outcomes?
That's not how it works in research. They don't dictate anything. They just give you money and you study. It's pretty easy. There's lots of other federal guidelines for other federal money, but research money is pretty much doesn't have very many restrictions on it. And most of what we're studying wouldn't affect our values at all. We're studying the brains of kids who have depression and then they're not depressed. It's nothing we do is like for or against Catholic teaching. You know, running isn't, exercise isn't against Catholic teaching. So our methods are all behavioral methods that work on kids. We also help them spiritually, which we think makes them stronger throughout their life, and our research shows that. So the effect we have on kids, because we deal with them body, mind, and spirit, has a longer effect than most other agencies.
Yes, do the boys and girls still work and do chores there too?
Yep, they mostly do them in the home. You asked if the boys and girls do chores, they do. morning and evening. They clean their own house. They make their own food in the home with the help of the adults. Many of them have jobs either on campus or off campus. First they have to have an on-campus job, and then they could have it off campus. Yep, so they still work, most of them, or they're in sports.
Yes, Father. With the ecumenical approach, though, and you did mention the spiritual aspects earlier, what kind of worship life are there for the children out there?
The kids pray before every meal, and whatever way they want to pray. So we have Jewish kids, Muslim kids, Christian kids of all denominations. They pray the way they are taught by their own spiritual leaders at the table, and they listen to other people pray at the dinner table. And we're expecting them to pray privately, and then they go to worship services once a week. Protestant, we have a Protestant chaplain and a Protestant church on campus and a Catholic church. If they're Jewish, they go to one of the synagogues. And they worship weekly. We highly encourage it, but if I say you have to be a really committed atheist to be at Boes Town and not go to church, because we make you do community service. And after about a week of that, they're like, yeah, I'd rather go to church. I give them an option. You can sit and write letters to shoulders. All right, I'll stick around for any other questions.
Thank you, Father.
Great, thanks everybody. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. God of all creation, we ask your blessings upon us as we go out into the world. Help us to always have that place in our heart for not only our own children, but for God's children that are hurting. Amen.
Amen.
All right. I'm used to ecumenical prayers. I don't do the sign of the cross. I really don't anymore.
Thanks, guys. Have a great month, and we'll see you next month.